Hello, I am Preston Higgins, and we are Group 4. We're here to talk to you today about black box testing. When we talk about testing, we're looking at two different types of testing, verification and validation. When we verify a product, we test to make sure the product runs without errors or crashing. When we validate the product, we check to make sure the product runs according to given user specifications. Black box testing falls under the validation type of testing. Here, in black box testing, we are checking to make sure that the program is functional, or that it meets the given system requirements from the user. We cannot see the source code of the product, but we do know the valid range of inputs and the expected outputs given those inputs. So we overlook the system and focus on those inputs and outputs, hence black box. We cannot see into the box, but we can give it inputs and retrieve the outputs. Here the focus is on what the software does, not how it does it. There are many different types or methods of black box testing. Here are just two of those methods: equivalence class partitioning and boundary value analysis. In equivalence class partitioning, we separate test cases into logical partitions or classes of errors. The hardest part of equivalence class partitioning is the separating of the test cases. And if it is done correctly, the tester will only need to use one test case from each of those classes or partitions. This helps to reduce the number of test cases needed to run. Boundary value analysis uses the partitions from equivalence class partitioning. Here we will focus on the boundaries between two different partitions. And the idea is that programmers make most of their mistakes near the boundaries of these classes. If we're given a range of inputs from M to N, we will need to test both M and N as inputs, but we will also need to test a value just below M and a value just above N. This generally creates more test cases than equivalence class partitioning, sometimes 4 or 5 times the amount. Here are some quick examples of each. If we made a forum for people entering personal information such as their age, and we wanted to think of test cases for testing the month, in equivalence class partitioning, we might separate these test cases into maybe things like valid range or valid input, valid numbers, or the valid format. In the boundary value analysis, we would look more specifically at the boundaries between those partitions. So if we were looking at the month, we would know that M is January or 1 and N is 12 for December. We would test both 1 and 12 as inputs, but we would also test 0 and 13. So with this, there are upsides and downsides, and I'll let the rest of our team members share that with you.
Black box testing is very useful when you do not need to know what the inner workings of the code looks like. You simply need to be able to execute the program and feed it different inputs, much like a regular user might. This can give a really good idea of how the program will function with typical end users. Another advantage to black box testing is that it is doable even if there is no access to the source code. As with the previous point, you can simply execute the program and test it as a hypothetical end user would with different inputs. When testing a software system, you want to ensure that it works properly. The black box test is easily used in order to confirm software functionality and can be done on a large variety of testers. You can also try out lots of different types of scenarios. You can have people test it for performance, for security, or usefulness. Black box testing is great for this because it is able to be performed by many, from everyday users to the technically and IT inclined, from high performance users to those that may be acting as hackers or people trying to penetrate the security. It's great for all kinds of types. Another benefit to black box testing is that the tests can be done by groups independent from the developers or their organization, since knowledge of the source code is not required. This gives a greater variety to the options available as to who can perform these tests. These could be users that are in different departments, different organizations, or in different and remote locations around the world. The speed at which black box testing can be done is another key benefit. Due to the lack of the need for the source code, these test cases can be designed and then performed fast, as long as you have the testers available.
Hello, I'm Ankita, and I'm going to talk about the downside of a black box testing. As we know, a black box testing is done before knowing any of the specifications of a program, which is the situation in many projects. So it is really hard to come up with test cases. And not all of the test cases and test scenarios are tested, so only limited areas are covered and many parts of the program are left untested. As a result, there is only limited coverage. There are high chances that a certain test gets repeated, and in this case, tests can be unwanted if the software designer or the developer has already run a test case before. One of the other downsides of black box testing is that testing all of the possible input stream is not possible to cover because it is time consuming, which would again lead us to leaving some parts of the program untested. Also, black box testing is not efficient to work with complex code as it will be hard to come up with possible test cases and not all of the program gets tested at the end. And lastly, finding a possible inputs within a limited time is slower and difficult.
My name is Calvin Garrett, and I will be concluding this presentation. The primary aim for black box testing is to uncover errors and validate software. The tester is making sure that inputs are giving the right outputs and that the programmers have not forgotten any validation in the program. These tests can be simple things like checking if you are catching the right numbers in an input field. The testers are checking the functional aspects of the software. They are focusing on what it does, not how it does it. When should you use black box testing? It is used in the final stages of testing. You want to make sure the program is handling the inputs right. This should be used on every project. It takes some time but prevents a multitude of issues in the future. The table on the right compares black box testing and white box testing. It outlines much of the information that I went over. Please pause the video and take a minute to review it. Last of all, these are our citations. Check them out if you want to learn more about black box testing.